Sarah Foster had worked at Hartman and Company for 3 years, steadily moving up from an intern to a well-respected project manager. She was known for being diligent and dependable, always the first to arrive and the last to leave. The office had become a second home of sorts, a predictable place, if a bit monotonous at times, but one she knew like the back of her hand. Her team relied on her to keep things organized and running smoothly, and she rarely took a day off. But over the past few weeks, Sarah had started feeling off. She noticed the odd glances from her coworkers first. It started with small comments, things she hardly registered. She was at her desk one morning, sipping her usual coffee and going over a client report, when her coworker Alex walked by and gave her a confused look.
"Didn't I just see you down by the lobby?"
he asked, brow furrowing. Sarah glanced up, a little amused.
"Nope. I've been here since 8. Why?"
He shrugged.
"I dunno. Thought I saw you going out the front door just now. Guess I was seeing things."
Sarah chuckled, raising an eyebrow.
"Or maybe a case of selective vision I warned you about. You only see what you want to see, right, Alex?"
Alex blushed, and a moment later they both laughed, and she returned to her report, dismissing it as nothing. The next day, as she was pouring herself a cup of coffee in the break room, Brenda from HR strolled in and gave her a curious look.
"Back so soon?"
Brenda asked, cocking her head. Sarah frowned slightly.
"What do you mean?"
Brenda blinked.
"I just passed you in the hallway a couple minutes ago. Didn't you go into the copy room?"
Sarah felt a strange prickling at the back of her neck.
"I've been in here for at least 10 minutes. Are you sure it was me?"
Brenda hesitated, her smile faltering.
"Well, yeah, I'm sure it was you. You even waved at me."
She forced a laugh, brushing it off.
"Must be your twin or something, huh?"
They both laughed, but as Sarah returned to her cubicle, an uneasy feeling lingered. She wasn't usually one to believe in weird coincidences, but something about these encounters felt off. Brenda wasn't the type to mix people up. Another time, Sarah's friend Mike mentioned he'd seen her in the parking lot, leaning against her car, even though she had been in the building all morning. These sightings continue over the span of a couple of weeks. The strange thing was, it wasn't just the sightings that were unnerving her. It was the fact that everyone who saw her claimed she looked different. She wasn't smiling, wasn't her usual energetic self. One colleague even said she looked lost when they saw her in the hallway. By the third week, the sightings had increased. It seemed that every other day, someone would comment about seeing her somewhere she hadn't been, often at odd times, or in places she rarely visited. Each time, the reports grew more unsettling not just for her, but to the people reporting them as well. According to others, her double was quiet and unsmiling, which was a stark contrast with her usual energetic self. They comment that her double always seemed to have a faraway look in her eyes. One evening, Sarah stayed late to finish a presentation. The office was nearly empty, with only the cleaning staff moving through the floors. She was just about to pack up when her phone buzzed with a message from a coworker, Lisa, who'd left an hour earlier.
"Why didn't you say hi in the lobbies?"
Sarah frowned and typed back a quick reply.
"What do you mean? I've been in my office the whole time."
Lisa's reply came almost immediately.
"I saw you by the elevators on my way out. You just stared at me. It was weird. Are you all right?"
A chill ran down Sarah's spine. She stood up, looking around her empty office. Above, the air conditioner hummed along quietly. A fluorescent light at the far end of the aisle flickered twice, casting shadows over the cubicles. She felt a prickling at the back of her neck, as if someone were watching her. Quickly, she packed her things and left, practically running to her car. She told herself it was just her imagination, that everyone's comments had just gotten into her head. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. So many of her coworkers had seen this other woman, a splitting image of herself. And yet, she hadn't seen her even once. Why not? It came to a head one evening. As she rounded the corner, She saw another female staff from the corner of her eyes standing at the far end of the hallway. Sarah looks up from her phone, did a double take and froze. Standing there, at the end of the hallway, was herself. Sarah was not prepared how identical her double looked. Her doppelganger was identical in every way aside from their clothing. The same hair, build, features, and even the same weary look in her eyes at the end of a hectic day. But there was something off about the other Sarah. Her expression was cold, almost hollow, and she was staring back at her with an intensity that sent chills down Sarah's spine. They locked eyes, and for a moment, it felt as though the world had stopped. Sarah wanted to say something, to confront this eerie double, but her voice caught in her throat. She felt like she was staring into a mirror, but instead of her reflection mimicking her movements, it simply stood there, watching her with dark, unreadable eyes. Then, slowly, the other Sarah raised her hand, pointing directly at her. Her lips moved, though no sound came out. Sarah's heart pounded as she struggled to make out the words.
"Help me."
The lights flickered, and in that split second, the figure disappeared. Sarah was left alone in the darkened hallway, her own shadow stretching eerily along the floor. Sarah stumbled back to her desk, barely able to breathe. Her hands were shaking as she gathered her things and left the office, avoid looking down the hallway where her double had been standing. She drove home in a daze, gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white, her mind replaying the silent plea on her double's lips.
"Help me."
That night, sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her own face staring back at her, hollow and pleading. She lay awake until dawn, finally calling in sick and spending the day wrapped in a blanket on the couch, telling herself it had been a nightmare, a trick of the light, stress, exhaustion. But the following morning, she returned to work, steeling herself to face whatever awaited her. As she walked in, she felt an unfamiliar sense of unease from her coworkers. They avoided her gaze, whispering as she passed, and even Lisa, her closest work friend, seemed unable to look her in the eyes. An hour later, Sarah's supervisor, Mr. Jacobs, came by her desk, looking unusually grim.
"Sarah,"
he said gently.
"I'd like to speak with you in private."
Nodding, Sarah followed him to his office, her stomach twisting as he closed the door. He motioned for her to sit, then folded his hands on his desk, searching her face with a puzzled expression.
"Sarah,"
he began,
"this might sound strange, but did you remember come into the office yesterday?"
She blinked, surprised.
No, I took the day off.
He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable.
"You were here, Sarah. In fact, several of us talked to you. You were here, sitting at your desk, working late into the night. I even asked if you were okay because I'd noticed you'd taken the day off. You just looked at me and said you are fine now. Is everything okay?"
Sarah felt a chill so intense she thought she might faint. She looked down at her hands, struggling to make sense of his words.
"You must have seen someone else,"
she whispered, barely able to keep her voice steady. Mr. Jacobs shook his head, his voice lowering.
"You look like you need a rest. Have you seen a doctor?"
The silence in the room was suffocating. Sarah's skin crawled as the realization settled over her. Whatever presence had haunted her in the office hadn't just been her imagination. It had taken her place. It was still here, filling her absence with its own shadowy presence.
"I think I need some time off."
She finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Jacobs nodded, understanding in his eyes.
"Take all the time you need."
Sarah gathered her things in silence and left her desk, unable to shake the feeling that someone was watching her. As the elevator descended, she caught a brief glimpse of her double through the door on one of the lobby floors. Was that really what she saw? It was brief after all. A part of her wanted to turn back and confirm, to confront and demand an explanation. But something deep inside warned her against it, an instinctive dread that told her some answers were better left unknown. As Sarah walked to her car, She heard a faint whisper echo in her mind.
You're not done yet.